Welcome to Access Your Leadership, where we share inspiring career stories and talk about ways you can level up your own leadership potential. I'm your host and coach, Hakeem Lakhdar, and today I'm here with my good friend from my Harvard days, Dr. Heidi Gardner. Heidi is a distinguished fellow and lecturer at Harvard Law School, a co-founder of Smarter Collaboration International, and CEO of Gardner & Co., a research and consulting firm that provides collaboration-focused solutions with boards and senior leadership teams to transform their organizations. Heidi, it is so great to see you and to have you here.
Thanks so much, Hakeem. I'm really looking for this conversation with you.
Me too. So before we get into the meat of the conversation, I'd love to hear from you about a leadership win, or professional or personal, that you have to share.
The one that springs to mind right now is leading Gardner & Co. So it is kind of my side gig from working at Harvard. I was at the business school at Harvard for 7 or 8 years and then switched to the law school, and I'm still teaching executives at both. And on the side, I've been building Gardner & Co., a research and advisory firm. And I think what I'm most excited about, Hakeem, is that we have been able to transition this business in a couple of ways. One is from just a more or less speaking engagements, right? So when my first book, Smart Collaboration, came out in 2017, I did 108 speaking engagements across 5 continents. And it was exhilarating, and it did exactly what we were hoping to do, which is embed these ideas and get them out, to a wide array of different kinds of companies and leaders and organizations. And at the same time, it left me virtually no opportunity to engage more deeply with any of those companies and individuals. And so one of the transitions we've been making is to work more intensively with a fewer number of companies so that we can help them really transform their business. We can help take them from the kind of culture which is very, numbers driven and successful in one regard, and round it out and make it a place where people really thrive. And people come to work and believe that they are valued and appreciated because they are legitimately, right? So one way we've transitioned the Gardner & Co. business is to just get deeper and, in a higher impact, measurable way with organizations. The second thing that I'm actually really excited about is, despite my name being in the name of the company, we're moving away from it being Heidi-centric. Right. So, early on founded the company and it really was just me and a part-time assistant. And now we have, are building out a whole, not only a full-time staff that are working on these ideas, but we have a whole ecosystem of, 100 plus professionals around the world, some of whom really deep specialist technical experts in an area like compensation or some kind of angle of software, and some of whom are coaches, et cetera. And so building out that ecosystem and moving now towards Smarter Collaboration International, which is our tools business, it takes the focus off of me and puts it squarely on the impact of these ideas in helping organizations and people thrive.
I love that. I really love the fact that you're actually creating a space for, as you said, for other professionals who are deeply passionate about this work too, to come in and really flex a little bit within your company and within the work that you're doing. And we were talking prior to us starting the episode about the benefit, going back to another one of your wins, of longer term engagements.
Yeah.
And how you can actually really embed yourself into these organizations with your clients. And it's not just like a, wham bam or one done, but it's really this, you get to be part of the transformation and witness it, working shoulder to shoulder with your clients.
100%. I mean, our work, the concept I have been focused on for well over a decade at this point is what I call smarter collaboration. It's helping people start with the end in mind. What is this complex challenge we're facing? And that could be transforming our organization so that we become, more competitively distinctive in our marketplace. It could be, right now, we're working with a range of organizations that are purpose driven. And so they have big picture goals in mind. How do we help our communities to get greater access to healthcare in these populations, et cetera? So when we think about smarter collaboration, we're getting people to start with the end in mind and being hyper intentional about who we need involved at any given point in time so that we have a holistic perspective here. And we live it and breathe it. I mean, that's what Gardner and Co does, is think at any moment, what is going to help our client achieve their strategic objectives? And do we need specialists in here? Do we need people who, have a doctorate in this area or decades of experience in that area, or who come from a particular cultural background that will allow them to see opportunities, right? And when we think about it that way and can pull from our ecosystem and bring people together at the right point in time, it allows our people to thrive, and it really supercharges our client journey so that they get further along and in a way that's much more likely to stick.
I can imagine. And then I love even just living and breathing, because I think as I think about the way that you're creating that culture within your own organization, and then, sharing this with your clients through the work that you're doing together, I'm always talking to clients about living and breathing leadership. Because in the context of leadership, and I'm not saying that people should eat, sleep, drink, breathe their work all hours of the day, but in terms of leadership, and a lot of the work that I do is around self-leadership, shows up and it impacts us in all aspects of our certainly professional careers, but all aspects of our lives. So when you can live and breathe it, and you can really be it and model that and then share that with your clients, I can imagine the impact that has.
It is incredibly wildly rewarding to be able to see some of this happen, right? And it is not unusual for me to get an email or a LinkedIn message from somebody who 7 years ago sat in my Harvard classroom and listened to this, and now is saying, hey, I'm at a point where we have constructed our team around these principles. We've trying to put this into place. Let me tell you what that's meant for me as a leader. Let me tell you about how it's affected all of these aspects. And completely agree with you, Hakeem, that this is, once you begin to look at the world through this lens, it absolutely affects how you think about many, many aspects of, not just the professional side, but the personal side too.
100%. Yeah. I don't think there's any looking back for me. I am forever changed as I think about the world in this way. And I think that you're so right. It's so rewarding to get those, messages years, months down the road, even where people are reflecting on the conversations you've had or the work that you've done together or the concepts that you've introduced, and then to say, I get it now. It's a little bit like the parenting journey. All of a sudden I'm a parent and I'm looking at my parents. I'm saying, okay, I get it now. I understand. I understand. But there's so much learning that has to go into that. And I think it's a willingness for people, you and I were talking about this before as well, for people to see the value in that and to understand that collaboration. And I love that you're so focused. I've always loved that you're so focused on collaboration, because I always ask this question of like, are we competing here? Or are we collaborating here?
Yeah.
To some of my clients. And I mean, some of them have no shame. They're like, I'm competing. I mean, like that's what I'm doing. I'm competing. And then I say, well, what are we gaining from that? And what would we gain from looking at this in a more collaborative way? And once we actually settle in that space, so much opens up and they start to realize, this is where I need to be operating from.
It is really liberating to have that kind of conversation. And talking to executives about this idea of hyper intentionality around who I surround myself with. And when I find people, when I start with that end in mind, and I find people who on any given initiative or project team can complement me and what I know and what I do best, that allows me genuinely to play to my strengths. I no longer have to pretend I'm great at 15 different things. I can show up and be great at something where I'm passionate about it. I've invested in building my skills and so forth, knowing that somebody's got my back, right? They're going to catch me when I go too far down the road in one direction, because they're looking at it through a different set of lenses, right? And they're like, whoa, hang on. Like, here are the second and third order effects of what you've just proposed. And that's the real value of having diversity, with a small d, right? Diversity that comes from just different perspectives, different life experiences, different professions and domains. And it is absolutely liberating for people to think about it that way. What could I do differently? How much more impact could I have? if day in, day out, my calendar was filled with the kind of things where I go, yes, I love that. Right. And we have more power over that, most of us, than I think a lot of people give themselves credit for.
Yeah, and it's so funny you mentioned calendars because people when they ask when I've since started my own practice and they've asked, so what's it like? What's it like? What must be really scary or what made you make the leap? I said there was no leap. It was a gentle step off the curb and I was so delighted to do it because now just and I use this as an example. When I look at my calendar, every meeting that I have on my calendar, I am genuinely looking forward to.
100%. I mean, on the one hand, I was about to say what a privilege, but it's not a privilege that somebody handed you. You crafted that. You were deliberate. You were really intentional about knowing what energized you and then building out, your ability. And you're a leadership coach, right? I mean, you're not trying to be everything else to people, and that allows you, I think, to really thrive. And I feel the same way. Back in 2016, January 1st, 2016, I made a New Year's resolution, which was unusual for me. I tend to think they're a little bit hokey, but that time it was an inflection point for me. And I decided at that moment, from then on, I was only going to work with people who gave me positive energy. And it is now, 8 years on, and I have renewed that commitment every year and oftentimes multiple times in a year. And positive energy doesn't mean that they're always in la la land. Like, it's not people who are happy. I mean, I hope they're happy a lot of the time. But for me, positive energy is people who are authentic. People give me positive energy when they are trying to make a positive difference in the area where they think that they can have an impact.
Mm,
They're thoughtful about this. They get a high out of other people's successes and
yeah,
being even a small part of that. They're not competitive. Like they're probably very competitive. Like I'm super competitive, but I am way more competitive with myself
mm,
than anyone else, right? And I push myself harder than I push anyone. And so it's not the lack of competitiveness, it's at whom is that competitive spirit directed?
mm.
To what end?
Yeah, in service
People,
of what? Right. Yeah.
yeah, in service of what? And so, for me, being able to think about who gives me positive energy, and sometimes I slip up, right? Sometimes, there's a situation, I can't go into too much detail right now, but I find myself interacting with somebody on a contractual obligation, and this is a person who just sucks the energy out of my day. And I look at my calendar and I just think, gosh, I'm going to have to steel myself to go into this conversation,
Yeah.
right? And I'm counting down the weeks until it ends and figuring out, how to leave the whole situation in a better place, but
Mm,
not with me as a part of it, or my team, because it's just not productive. It's not constructive. It's a win-lose mentality. And I don't need to endure that. And once I figured out that I could make those choices and be far better off for it, then that was a shift for me. And let's be honest, if somebody's giving me bad vibes, I'm pretty sure it's reciprocal. So it's not like I'm walking away from these partnerships where people are begging me to stay. It's I make the decision and I have the courage and the wherewithal to say, this isn't working out. And
yeah.
I think everyone's going to be in a better place when it ends.
Yeah.
So that positive energy screen is one that I try very hard to be mindful of at the start of any engagement, and to use it to really test whether this is the best and highest use of my time, my team's time, our IP, and so forth.
Yeah. Well, I have always loved your positivity. And I love the fact that you are so conscious of that. And while I wouldn't wish any more challenging clients on anybody or unpleasant situations, it does help to really anchor you into how committed you are to maintaining that positivity in terms of clients and relationships and interactions in your life so that it can continue to fuel and feed your own passion, your own positivity.
Yeah, without a doubt. And, I do think that sometimes we make compromises in one area very, eyes wide open and even strategically. And, I think that this current situation was one there was a bit of that. There was also, some surprises along the way, but completely agree with you. I'm framing it as what a great learning experience.
Mm,
This is absolutely still very highly relevant for me that I use this filter. And, how do we make the most of it and learn from it and move on?
yeah, exactly. I mean, not to get super coachy, but I mean, it's just a distinction also between growth mindset, fixed mindset, right? I
Totally.
mean, it's so easy to come at that from a fixed mindset and just like, ho hum, let me just like drag myself through this kicking and screaming, or to see it as something that was a choice and something that I'm now a part of. And what is there to learn? What is there to gain from this? Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually a good opportunity for some of my colleagues at Gardner and Co. to see me in action under less than ideal circumstances,
Yeah.
right? Because we're all going to be put under pressure at different times, and there's a big difference between that kind of pressure versus time pressure, for
Yeah.
example, right?
Yeah.
And asking my colleagues, here's how I'm thinking about this. Do you see it in a different way? How do we approach this? What do you think I could have done differently after one of those really challenging interactions? So it is, if it doesn't kill us, it makes us stronger. Let's not do it too often.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I don't need death by a thousand cuts or anything, right?
That's it.
So you mentioned your earlier book, Smarter Collaboration, and all your travel and all of what went into that. You have a new book out too, right?
Right. So the first one was Smart
Yeah,
Collaboration.
that's right.
Smarter Collaboration came out just over a year ago. And honestly, we really tried to practice what we have been preaching and researching up until then. So, first book, my name is solo on the cover. I was very, very, very clear about acknowledging all the sorts of people whose ideas we built on in order to get there. I think I used the first person plural. So I said we all through the book, and my editor kept saying, "Wait a minute, it's just you." I was like, "No, no, 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 no. Like this is not an I thing. This is definitely a we thing." So there were lots of people in hundreds, literally hundreds of ways who contributed to the thinking in that first book. And in the second book, brought on a co-author, Ivan Matviak, who is exactly what we mean when we say find somebody who's complementary, right? So, I'm an academic, love data and analytics, but I'm often filtering things through the lens of what does the research say? Can we back this up empirically and so forth? Ivan has had this rich and varied career as a senior executive. He's worked in consumer products and consulting. He's also worked in financial services and private equity and tech companies. He's led many, many thousand people organizations. So he lives and breathes what we are talking about. And the marriage of bringing together those two differing perspectives and examining any topics that we put through the ringer, right? We talk about collaboration traps like the risk of overcommitment. We talk about the upside in terms of the business case for collaboration. We talk about the how-tos like getting your compensation system right and being able to bring our unique points of view together into that book was exhilarating.
Mm, yeah, and I don't mean to make this distinction as in you are one and he is the other, but it sounds like a nice blend of theory and practice in a lot of ways. And
Absolutely.
I was just wrapping up a engagement with a client, and he was mentioning that he had participated in a, I don't know, 8 or 10 week long leadership development course, and it was extremely valuable. And then here we are, on a 6 month engagement working together. And as we were wrapping up, he said, "I want to tell you what we talked about in this coaching was everything that we touched upon in that leadership training course. The difference was in my coaching with you, we were actually able to apply it practically in every single session. So the marrying of those two ended up being extremely valuable for him, and he got immense value from having done one after the other."
Yeah, 100%. And that's what Ivan and I bring to our work together. So I've been just a few days back officially launched Smarter Collaboration International. We co-founded it together. He is the CEO, and so we have these sister companies that are working in tandem now. Where I'm running the services business and the research and advisory side of it. He's running the tools and technology business, and again, it just brings together our different experiences and plays that out in ways that we can flex a lot in terms of what do our clients need at any given time, but it certainly enriches the whole package by having a broader range that we can draw from.
Yeah. Well, I love the work that you're doing. I've always appreciated and respected and admired the way that you passionately pursue this work. And now I kind of want to get to, so how did you get here? How did we get to where we are now? What is Heidi's story? Where did you start, and what were some of the twists and turns along the way that led you to where you are now?
Hakeem, when I used to teach our MBA students back at Harvard Business School, the final day of class, you were always supposed to do something, different, step away from the curriculum and talk about your story or something. And I had a slide that I showed, and the title of it was, "We could have never planned this journey." And it showed, a world map, and it showed, the dot for me moving all over, and then another dot joined, and started moving all over the world, and eventually we started moving together. And the point there is that if I had started as a whatever age, 18-year-old entering university, or 25-year-old making choices along those ways, I could have never ever planned to be where I am now. And yet, with the benefit of hindsight, I can look at it and say, had I not done nearly every one of those different experiences, there's no way I could be as successful today as I am. And so what does that journey look like? If you start in, kind of ancient history, I grew up in Amish country, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. My parents' property bordered an Amish farm, right? That's how close we were. And the values of that community were not very different than the family that I grew up in. It was fairly patriarchal. It was not particularly intellectual, and I don't mean that in a condescending way at all, but I mean it in the sense of not encouraging people to really challenge the status quo, not believing that there was as much value in thinking for thinking's sake. It was kind of a bit hierarchical, and for whatever reason that always chafed, right? I'd never frankly felt like I really fit in there, and was incredibly blessed, made the great decision to get born into a family where I had two parents who were wildly supportive, right? So that is an enormous boost for me, encouraged me to get an education, go out and spread my wings. And I was a Japanese major in undergrad. I went to Penn, majored in Japanese, lived in Japan, worked and studied there, put myself through a year or 2 semesters at Japanese universities. So, by teaching and working there. And so talk about boggling the mind, right? Moving from a culture where we used to talk about foreigners in my town. We meant people from New York. I am not joking. That is no exaggeration.
Yeah.
When I grew up, foreigners were people. My older brother, who's 9 years older, when we were talking about that one time, he laughed and said, well, in the 9 years difference between us, what really changed is, when he was at a certain age, foreigners were people from Philadelphia, right? And so, it had expanded, mind share had expanded rapidly, by my part of the generation, it was, people as far away as New York. But think about, the idea that a foreigner's from somebody who's from a big city a couple hours away, to me living in Japan and learning to read, write, and speak in completely different ways that required a very, very different mindset in terms of, I'm here in your culture and let me understand and experience what that means to you. Even if I think that I don't agree with it, I'm not going to reject it because it's so different or maybe even bumps up against my value set, but let me just live it and experience it. And so that was really transformative for me and how I think. And fast forward, I finished Penn and went to work at Procter and Gamble. I left there to have a Fulbright fellowship in Germany. I lived in former East Germany. And this was 95, 95 or 90, yeah, 95, I think it was. So not terribly long after reunification.
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity then to work with the German Ministry of Education and help make changes in their public school system around the English teaching. And seeing people who had gone through a whole lot of adversity with so much optimism and grit and determination to make differences made me realize that, I thought I had had to overcome some real challenges. I guess I did in my own way, but it was put in perspective there in Eastern Germany, and for sure all over again when I lived in South Africa. I had, after my degree at the London School of Economics, worked for McKinsey and spent a year in Joburg, and seeing what people, seeing their journey and the belief that that was back in the year 2000, that they really had a huge sense of possibility, as well as understanding what it meant for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to be underway and people to be forgiving folks who had done simply atrocious things. Those were experiences that made me introspect very deeply
Mm.
about values, and especially, I think, Hakeem, about what could I possibly offer that would be valuable to the world.
Mm.
And I'm not trying to change the world, but I would like to be able to wake up many days and feel like in my own way, in the, corner of the world that I inhabit, I can make it better for some people that day, right? And through my work and my research and my teaching and in every other avenue, that's something that matters to me a lot. I never forget where I've come from, but I also never forget where I'd like to end up. And thinking about the many, literally thousands of people that have contributed to that along the way, I actually feel a sense of, I don't want to say obligation, but I do want to say responsibility to, having been on the receiving end of so much experience and wisdom and grace and everything else. Now, like, I'm trying to put that into the best use possible.
Mm. Ah, what a journey, Heidi. I think the word that just kept coming up for me, and like this big bold word, as if it was a word cloud, and it was just screaming, it's this perspective
Mm.
that allowed you to have. And when you were able to reflect inward on so much of what you were experiencing and its contrast to what you had experienced in your younger years, and to see that you were just this one person of billions of people on this planet experiencing the world in these different parts of the world,
Yeah,
and getting to compare and contrast all of what you were learning and feeling and hearing and seeing. um, it's no wonder that when you think about collaboration, what better perspective to have than we are one
yeah, yeah,
in many ways, and then to also reflect on how that allowed you to evolve as a person, as a professional, as a contributor to something bigger, something greater, while also still maintaining this real honest understanding of where you come from too.
I think, and it's the latter point, Hakeem, I think that has come more recently perhaps than it should have, right?
Mm.
Because when I think about these great experiences, like, God, I'm about to stand up and do a keynote to, 600 people, and somebody's reading my bio and these accomplishments, blah, blah, blah. It sounds like a bit of puffery, at least to me, right? Like, yeah, okay, tick, tick, tick. I've done these things, and it has been great. I don't want to, I don't want to be falsely humble. Like, I've accomplished a huge amount, and I am very well aware that that is simply my way of making an impact, right? That those were the things that I did along the way to have an impact in the way that I could. But I don't think it's necessarily better than other people, right?
Mm.
Like, I look at my older brother, my referenced earlier. He stayed in our hometown. I don't think he's ever lived more than probably 10 miles from where he was born. Married his high school sweetheart, had a family early, and is making a tremendous impact in his community in the ways that he does, and it's inspiring, right? So very, very different, but not better or worse.
Yeah.
And, I think that for me is probably the biggest benefit of having lived and participated in so many cultures, not just observed them as a tourist, but I've lived and worked on 4 continents now, and really immersing myself to that degree helps me see that there are many, many, many different ways to make contributions that are equally valuable and wildly different.
Mm. I love that, and I love the comparison without judgment. I mean, because there's no judgment there. There's only love, and you're reflecting on that and celebrating that
Yeah,
as a distinction, but not as a comparison for sort of a right or wrong, better or worse. And it
yeah,
makes me think of when I'm talking to clients or I'm doing a one-to-many leadership training session. There's this concept that we spend a lot of time on, which is it comes up with this little cartoon, and you've probably seen it before, where it's like 3 planks of wood, and from one perspective it's three, and from the other it's four. And the idea is just because you're right doesn't mean they're wrong.
yeah. 100%, 100%. And I think that's that's kind of where I had to get to in my journey, is really that genuine belief in the value of that diversity, right? That it is not threatening. It doesn't diminish my accomplishments to have somebody have done it, very differently. I don't have to defend my choices. And at the same time, I can be really confident that having impact in the best way that I can.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it doesn't mean I'm satisfied. God knows I'm never happy with status quo. I'm always pushing myself. And at this point, I'm pushing myself from the perspective of how do we build something? How do we grow this way of operating so that it can positively affect and touch many people, as opposed to how do I do this so that I can put some points on the scoreboard and, make sure I have more than other people.
Mm, yeah. And when I think about all this, it, and you mentioned it earlier, so diversity with little d, maintaining this perspective and this openness to other perspectives is what I think makes that little d so actually complementary to that larger D diversity,
Yeah.
where we understand this is diversity in all aspects, sort of holistically, that if you can maintain that mindset, then that just kind of ends up being an overlay to how we see diversity more broadly.
Yeah.
And
I think that's
people
right.
sometimes try to distinguish between the two, but I think it's really about a mindset. It's about an understanding of oneself and the world around us, whether it be people or cultures or languages, whatever it might be, that allows us then to just be simply open to all of the newness, all of the differences that actually make the collaboration, we'll use that word, that much richer.
Absolutely. There's a phrase that I chide myself with sometimes. If I find myself um, feeling tense about something that I notice is really different from me, whether it's just the way somebody looks or speaks or something that they've said to me, the thing I keep saying to myself is, wouldn't the world be boring if we were all the same?
Mm,
Right? And I kind of poke myself with that. I think I probably started saying that to my dad early on when he was, a bit bristly about, why does this person wear that or whatever. And now I say it to myself because I think it keeps me honest, right? I mean, how do I look at that person who initially was, a bit of the grit in the oyster, just like, not so sure. And how do I look at it instead and say, what can I learn? And it sounds a bit, I don't naive, maybe even, but it's that I'm trying to spark in myself the curiosity to understand those differences, because I know for sure that there must be something there that I can learn.
yeah, curiosity is that key word for sure. I was just talking to someone the other day, and I was referencing Ted Lasso episode where he's playing darts, and he's saying, be curious, not judgmental. And if you haven't seen it, I encourage you, just Google it, Ted Lasso dart scene. It's just such a great scene because it's about this idea of being curious, genuinely. And I talk a lot about this mostly in my leadership trainings, where I'm sharing with people to seek to understand before being understood. And as leaders, it's so easy to fall into this trap of, well, they're not listening. They're not doing what I'm telling them to do. They don't understand me. And it's like, whoa, 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 let's slow down. What if we tried the approach of seeking to understand what's driving their behavior, where they're coming from, before we're trying to get everyone to understand what we want or what our expectations are?
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I totally see
So,
that.
so I'm actually really eager to understand. So all of the travel and all of the education that you sort of committed to, was there ever a sense along the way that you were doing this because you should do this or because you needed to do this? Or what was that feeling like? Did that ever come up for you?
Maybe almost the opposite, Hakeem.
Mm,
Like I remember when I was leaving McKinsey. Yeah, I had been, and I was on the partner track at McKinsey and had done just, tremendous work. I had amazing colleagues, clients all over the place. And I remember I had made the decision that I really wanted to go back for my PhD. I had this burning question at McKinsey. I kept observing that, some teams were way better than others. Even teams like when I was leading them both, some teams were way better than others at just fully drawing out the full complement of everyone's knowledge and experiences on a team. And some teams were kind of at doing that. So I had this burning question that I was dying to explore. I really wanted to go back into academia because I had a master's, but I wanted to get my PhD. And I remember sitting on the Champs-Elysees in the McKinsey office, waiting for the clock to strike noon there so that it would be 6 a.m. at my parents' house because I wanted to call them at a slightly civilized time of day and let them know that I had decided to leave McKinsey.
mm,
And like this was a big deal because I mean, I was earning more in a year than people that I grew up with could have ever imagined. Like it
mm,
was like crazy money kind of thing. And it was glamorous and it was all of these kinds of things. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I'm walking away from this. Like my
mm,
parents sacrificed so much to help me get to undergrad. And, and I put so much work in since then. And like, who am I to walk away from all of that career success, kind of to start over as a student again? And, I just wanted to come clean to them. And God, I'm getting choked up. They were like, what took you so long?
mm,
They were, my parents reminded me, like, you've always had this passion for teaching and you are so excited to, find the new thing and you love doing research. You always have. And you talked about becoming a professor from the time you were like too small to even know what it meant. Right.
mm,
So like this is completely obvious to us. This is a great next step. And so I thought I was making a move that I maybe shouldn't do because I was stepping off this, career track. And then it turns out it was like, oh, okay. I guess this is, more natural than I was giving self credit for. So, then I had that like repeat all over again when I was, not just leaving McKinsey to go into academia, but when I stepped off the tenure track at Harvard, people were like, are you mad? Are you crazy? I was like, no, I have this book burning inside my head. I have to get the pages out and it's not something I can do unless I'm, working in a different capacity at the university. And I want to start this business and so a couple of times I've walked away from a position that most people thought was perfect for me. And
mm,
there was like the next thing that I wanted to pursue. And so I think I didn't make those choices because I felt obliged to move in that direction. I probably felt more obliged to stay, but I was fairly confident that it would take me in a direction that I felt I just needed to go.
mm. And sounds like it was aligned with
Yeah.
who you've always been, right? I mean, it reminds me of the way ego hell is described. It's this idea of performing for imaginary people's imaginary expectations of you. And so many people get stuck in these patterns, in these pathways in their life because of what they imagine imaginary people expect of them.
Yes.
And then they think, well, I'm just going to stay here because why wouldn't I? I mean, and even relative to your journey, maybe not in the same way, but even as I was leaving Harvard Law School, to not have a job that I was going to with 4-month-old twins, everyone was like, what are you, crazy? What are you doing? And for me, I just felt called to do something different and create towards a vision that I had in my mind of something. And now, I mean, I want to tell the story. I'm living in a home that if you had stopped me on the street in Cambridge and said, here's a napkin and a pen, sketch for me your dream home, I'm living in it.
Yeah.
And I'm doing what I want to do. And when I was at University of Miami and I left to start my practice, people are like, are you kidding me? You're a one income family. You've got, kids at home, and you're going to, at this point in your career. And I just felt that, to your point, there was something in me that said, yes, I hear you, but that's your journey. That's not my journey.
Totally. Yeah, I completely get it. And then the funny thing is, some of the same people, real people, not imaginary people, who had said, you must be mad, right? You must be insane to walk away from the thing that everybody wants. And I was like, okay, everybody minus one, like, because it's not what I want right now.
Yep.
Those same people sometimes come back a couple of years later and almost say, I told you so. Like, you're doing exactly what you should be doing. I knew you should. I was like, really? Because where were you, Mr. Support Guy, when I was trying to make this tough decision? But it's funny. I wonder if I've done the same kind of thing. It's sort of confirmatory evidence. We're looking for what we expect to see, and then we see it. But I just feel wildly fortunate to be in the situation that I am. I've had lots of lucky breaks. Part of we make some of our own luck. I get that. I have worked and I continue to work incredibly hard, but I love what I do. And, I'm the only one making those decisions. I don't really have a boss per se.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably that degree of autonomy which allows me to keep making these decisions, to, continue working that hard, because it's rewarding in a whole variety of ways.
Yeah. And as you think back to that, those various points in time where you were making these decisions, if/when that inner critic, inner voice came up and said, maybe you do want to, what was that conversation like? Maybe what was the conversation around when you were thinking, is this the right choice for me? Or you started to even momentarily doubt this decision, this compulsion to do something else?
Yeah. Well, Hakeem, I do have to say, one area where I am really incredibly blessed is my marriage. Right. So I mentioned Ivan Matviak earlier in the context of my co-author and my business partner. We have been married for 25 and a half years as well. And one of the things that Ivan and I don't know to say decided, because that sounds like it was slightly calculated, but we agreed, is that we kind of took turns, right? When I was thinking about leaving McKinsey and going back for my doctorate, we decided that I would stay in the UK because he had taken his dream job, right? And so it was like, okay, well, I'm going to, quote unquote, limit my options. Turned out to be fabulous program and opened up an incredible number of doors and so forth. So it was great. But then when it was time for me to move from my PhD program to a faculty position, it was like, he said, I've got a job I love here. I'm thriving in every sense in my job. And hey, go find whichever faculty position you can get, and let's, figure out which one works for us. And by that time we had, two little girls. They were both born in London, and we were making decisions on behalf of family. Right? But when the critic in me, the devil sits on the shoulder, when it's the doubt, I'm just really, really fortunate to be able to turn to Ivan and talk those things through, because we really grew together in so many ways. We started dating when I was 24, right? So in nearly all of my professional success and, downs as well as ups, we've experienced together. And so we can use many of those times as a touchstone to say, hey, remember when? Like, it looked really scary then too, and this is another one of those.
Yeah, well, I have the pleasure of meeting Ivan. He's fantastic. And I love hearing stories of supportive partners, because it just really highlights how important it is to have that support network around you, and to be authentic in your decision making and what you value and what you desire, so the people around you can support you in service of that, and not be sitting here wondering, well, you don't seem all that sure about your decision. I don't know how I'm supposed to be sure of my support. But when
Yeah.
you are actually really grounded and really confident in what it is that you want to do and what you want to accomplish and what you're capable of, the people around you see that. And last night, I remember Caitlin and I were sitting on the couch and we were just sort of winding down. We were about to watch a show and just to sort of like decompress. And we were like, I don't know, 3 minutes into the show and we hit pause. And we had an hour and a half long conversation. It was about just this and this journey and how she was home with the boys for the first 5 years. And she ended up deciding that she was going to go back to work, but do, something that would support the family a little bit while the business got off the ground. And now the business is thriving and we're talking about what next. And it was just such a beautiful exchange. And I looked at her and I thought to myself, oh, I just feel so fortunate that I have somebody in my corner like you. And I think this is just to sort of to not undervalue how important it is to have those people in your life.
100%. And, you and I have it in our marriage. I look at friends who have built out that network in very, very different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I'm excited to explore this idea with people who have built really different lives, not the traditional family sense whatsoever, but have equally vigorous support networks, people who value them for who they are. And I think that there are as many ways to do this as there are humans on the planet. And it's certainly another area where I hope people don't use that imaginary expectations of imaginary people framework, because it would be really misguided to say, what support looks like for this person over here might not even feel supportive to me, and vice versa.
That's right.
I think there's a lot of scope for us to understand how to help other people on their journeys, whether we're a teeny, teeny sliver of their life or a really big part of it.
Agreed. I think one size fits all might work for fitted hats, but does not work for life. And
100%.
it certainly doesn't work for leadership. So there are so many amazing different directions that we could take this for probably another 2 or 3 hours. I'm mindful of time. Heidi, when you think about people who are listening and we're thinking about the ways in which we lead ourselves and we lead others, what is a skill or attribute that you think people ought to focus on if they want to become better leaders?
I think the skill that people need to focus on in order to become better leaders is that curiosity. We talked about it a moment ago, but I think perhaps not even, but especially when there is an irritant trying to turn it around and saying, why do they keep banging on about that thing? I thought we agreed that it wasn't going to happen. Like, why? What? Okay, let's turn that into, okay, what do they see that I don't? Right? Or, gosh, that person, is speaking in a way that I find really, offensive. It's like, God, I wonder where they came from, that's like, the way they think is the most effective way to express themselves. I mean, it sometimes it's like a huge stretch, to be able to do that. And I might not come around to seeing the world through their eyes, but at least asking the question initially, like, what's going on here? What am I missing? As opposed to why don't they see it like I do?
Yeah.
And I think for leaders, that skill is invaluable because at a minimum, it gives us a moment before we react.
Yeah.
And, processing, prefrontal cortex kind of processing is something I think that's really important, and asking a logic kind of question, what am I missing? Why are they doing this? Brings the situation to a level of consciousness so that even, I hope my facial expressions don't reveal that I was super irritated, or that, the way I interact with somebody is, maybe more measured or even more supportive. And so for me, I think that's a really crucial leadership skill. If we want to be role models of this way of embracing true differing perspectives and so forth, being able to pause and ask that and believe it, I think is vital.
Yeah. No, I love curiosity. I think that's such an undervalued skill. I mean, I don't think I've had any guests say curiosity, yet it's so important, and especially in the context of collaboration, what an entree to collaboration. Sometimes, when we think of the word trigger, most people go thinking about it's triggering something negative in me, but we can also reframe that and think of, to your point, if something causes me to pause or causes me some, discontent, or makes me feel a little squidgy, let that be a trigger to be more curious, to actually lean into that.
100%.
And I really love that as a thought because, in sort of quoting Ryan Holiday, obstacles the way, again, obstacle we think sometimes as things happening to us, events in our lives, but actually an obstacle can be just a sort of disruption in our interactions, in our exchanges. And that obstacle actually, if we get curious, can be the way to build trust, to collaborate more effectively, to understand that perspective differently, to actually innovate. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
100%.
So I love that. Heidi, can you give us a little bit of sense of where people can find more about what you're doing and get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, LinkedIn, I'm on there and try to be quite active in putting some of our latest thinking and findings out on LinkedIn. We also have our website, gardnerandco.co. And soon we will have the Smarter Collaboration International website as well. And looking forward to populating that with some of our latest thinking also.
So exciting. And I will put all of that in the show notes too, so people can reference it in the show notes. Heidi, I have missed you. I really always enjoyed our conversations. When you mentioned 2016 and this sort of awareness piece that you were sharing, I was like, oh, I knew you back then. I was like, that was so many years ago at this point, but it's been so nice spending this time with you. And thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks for all that you're doing, Hakeem. I know you're making a really big difference out there and it matters a lot. So thank you.
My pleasure. And thank you again. As always, I'd love to hear from you about the episode. What came up for you as you think about leveling up your leadership game? And please, if you enjoyed the episode, I encourage you to like and subscribe. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn at Hakeem A. Lockdar or at lockdarcoaching.com. Thanks for tuning in. Keep being great, and we'll see you next time.